All right, so I do need you guys to do me a favor and participate a little bit today since I'm asking you a few different questions. I just want you guys to have some interaction with me so I'm not standing up here all by my lonesome answering my own questions the entire period. So to start off with, we are talking about persuasion. Just in general, we'll talk about persuasion. Then I'll discuss different ways that we think about persuasion from the speaker perspective and also from the audience perspective. We'll discuss 4 different ways to motivate your audience to respond. Those are the things that we will apply during our speech. We will specifically have graded pieces of the speech for the 4 different ways to motivate your audience to respond. And then also we'll start talking about how we're going to change our specific purposes and our central ideas. So that's what we're going to get to cover today, yeah.
I don't know if this matters to you, but when you're that far over, you're not on the iPad screen.
It doesn't matter to me. I want this to be shown more than I want myself to be shown. No, I appreciate that, though. I took time before class to set this up the way that I wanted it. I actually have a full video camera over here, too, but the iPad has better pictures, so I went with the iPad. All right, so to get started, I have a couple questions for you guys just to get thinking about persuasion. When have you used persuasion in the past week? When have you persuaded somebody else to do something? Yes?
Last night I persuaded my friends to go to Wings.
Was it hard?
Yeah, because they couldn't agree on where to go.
Oh, really? Where'd you end up going?
The tab.
What? I was totally there last night getting wings.
Oh, really?
That's awesome. Somebody else had their hand raised?
During this past week, I made my friends drive to Walmart so we could buy cookies and eat them and just eat them, the raw cookie dough.
So did you have to kind of barter a little bit and be like, I'm going to make you all
I'll
these
buy
great
you
cookies?
cookies and you can eat the cookies if you drive me to Walmart.
Great example. I would have fallen for that too. Christy?
I had to persuade someone to take my shift tomorrow.
Ooh, was that hard?
A little bit, but like they were just like I didn't really do much. I just was like, if you can, like, here's my email. And she emailed me and she said she would take part of it. And then I had to persuade my boss to let me not come in for the rest of it.
Wow, that's nice. You must be really good at persuasion.
Yeah.
Well, if any of you guys, I guarantee you've done some sort of persuasion, but if any of you asked your parents for money in the last week, if any of you, sorry, I lost my place, tried to get more hours at work or less hours at work, that was a perfect example. These are things that I've actually heard from students in the past week, so if you're talking about trading shifts or something like that, or if you tried to get a better grade from a professor in the last week. Since we're just getting done with speech number 3, I guarantee you that somebody in this class came to me and asked what the grade was, why it was that way, and why can it be higher? Please, can it be higher? No. So these are things that happen often for college students, but not just for college students, we use them every day. When have you guys been persuaded in the last week?
Anytime you go shopping, you're being persuaded to buy stuff because of the advertisements.
Absolutely. Joy?
Well, that was real close. My sister was the one persuading me to buy things I didn't need to be buying.
Perfect. That's perfect. Whether it's actual person persuading you to buy something that they want you to have or that they like a certain brand better than something else or any advertisement, that's persuasion. Or if anybody over St. Patrick's Day was a DD, which I hope you guys were because that would be very nice of you, you were being persuaded to do that. Even if it's something that you would have volunteered to do, somebody probably asked you to. Whether the persuasion's easy or hard, it's persuasion. And I would argue that persuasion is the most used and abused of all forms of communication. We're very rarely having a conversation without a goal in mind. So if you guys think about when you're hanging out with your friends, what kind of things do you talk about? Give me an example.
TV shows, movies, sports.
Yeah. What do you say about TVs, movies, sports?
Whether we like or dislike movies, what our opinions are on the movies. Why a movie was stupid, that was great.
Exactly. Why a movie was stupid or why the movie was great. You're getting your friends to watch those and you want them to share your same opinions. So you're persuading them either to watch it or to like it if they didn't like it the first time. Reasons that it's good. When you're talking to your parents, what kind of things do you talk about? Or children?
What they're doing.
Hmm?
What they're doing.
What they're doing? What else?
Nice weather we're having.
That's how you talk to your parents. It's so nice out today. Cancel classes all day long. Personally, I think of this because as a communication major, my parents constantly were asking me why I chose communication. What are you going to do with that degree? And that's also something that's very common when you're, as a child, are trying to communicate with your parents. You're constantly rationalizing what it is that you're doing, why you're doing things. Maybe you're persuading your parents to give you that money, or maybe you're persuading your parents that you don't need so much smothering anymore because you're ready to go out on your own. But it all has to do with some sort of goal that you're trying to accomplish. And this is also true when you have conversations with strangers. What are some of the first things that we do when you talk to a stranger?
Get to know them.
You get to know them, yeah, and you share things about yourself. Do you do that just purely out of the desire to inform them about you as a person? Sometimes. The goal of that is to get them to think that you're a good person. You want to find that common ground so that they'll like you. It's not a strong form of persuasion, but you're picking and choosing the information that you give to them so that they'll like you instead. You never go up to a stranger and say, "Hi, my name is Jamie. I've been married for 1.5 years. I teach public speaking. I like motorcycles, and I like to play tennis a lot as well." And then I just run and skip away because I just wanted to talk to that person and tell them about myself. It doesn't happen that way. So anytime that we're talking to somebody else, we use a lot of persuasion. The goal is very rarely just to purely inform somebody. But of course we use persuasion more purposefully as well. So in this class and in our own lives, some of the reasons that we use persuasion are to promote our own worthy ideals and causes. Something actually worthy, not just like watch this TV show, but we purposefully use it to promote other more important things that we care about. Again, we want our friends and the people we're surrounded by to share attitudes, beliefs, and values with us. So we use persuasion in order to convince them to agree with the things that we say and to also care about the things that we care about. We also use it to change or reinforce beliefs. So I have this up here because there's a difference between changing and reinforcing beliefs. If people disagree with you, you want them to change and come over to your side. But we also use it just to strengthen the beliefs that we share with each other. So if you have that one friend and you get to talking about something that you're really passionate about, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I agree, and this. Oh yeah, I agree, and that," and you both get really excited about it, I know I'm not the only one that that happens to. It's because you and your friend are both trying to reinforce those beliefs in each other, and it helps you as a speaker, your confidence as a person, and it also helps you know that the people around you are agreeing with you. So we want to gain acceptance of our beliefs, and we want to defend ourselves against the persuasion of others. So even when somebody else is trying to change our beliefs or attitudes or values or behavior in some way, we have to use persuasion back in order to either be persuaded or not to be persuaded. We're trying to stay consistent with what we have consistently believed up to this point, and we don't want to be persuaded by others. We like to have consistent beliefs throughout our lives. When we talk about cognitive dissonance later, this will come up again, the choice of whether to be persuaded or not to be persuaded. So in this class, we are not just informing our audience about something, we have to advocate for something. Not educating, we're advocating. So we're asking our audience to make that choice of changing their beliefs or of staying where they are. You guys will never lose points on a speech if you don't convince your entire class to agree with the statement that you're trying to persuade them about. The goal is that you're trying to persuade them. You're trying to provide logical evidence and reasoning in order to change or reinforce your audience's point of view. So with this, when you're choosing a topic, think about something that you might have to change some points of views on. Is there a dichotomy or some sort of polar attitudes, beliefs, or values on that subject so that you can push for one way or the other? If you want to argue that breakfast is good for you, that's great. That's wonderful. But you don't really have to advocate for that. Most people already understand that point of view. So try to choose something that you have to advocate for. Provide some evidence and reasoning for that. In our democratic society that we have to be able to critically evaluate other people's messages and logical evidence and reasoning and motive appeals in order to defend ourselves against that persuasion. But if we understand them well enough, we can use it as both that defensive and offensive activity to persuade others and to be defending our own persuasion. So I'm asking you guys again, what are some events that have specifically occurred because of persuasive rhetoric? And what are some instances of persuasive rhetoric that you can remember in history that have led to events happening or to change?
The attacks on Pearl Harbor and FDR's response to them were all forms of persuasion to get the United States involved in World War II.
Absolutely. The attacks on Pearl Harbor weren't a purposeful tool to persuade the United States to enter the war, but all the rhetoric that came afterwards was very, very persuasive and very dynamic, coming from a credible speaker that did lead to action on the part of the United States. What's another example, Joy?
Roe versus Wade.
Roe versus Wade, absolutely. Any courtroom case ever, absolutely. Any election ever, persuasive rhetoric leads to change or action in some way. I'm surprised you guys haven't brought up the Holocaust or the Civil Rights Movement, but both of those are great examples. And we can think of specific speakers who began the change or who have instigated the change. Basically, any movement ever that has changed the values or the morals or the ethics of a society have to be started by one big instance of persuasive rhetoric. Okay, so when we're thinking about rhetoric, there are two different ways that we tend to think about it. The classical rhetoric model focuses on what we do as a speaker in order to persuade our audience, and the elaboration likelihood model focuses on what the audience takes in and how they interpret a message to be persuaded. So I'm going to talk about each one of these. It's just a preview. The classical rhetoric model is Aristotle's classic rhetoric. From the 4th century, golden age of rhetoric, these are the guidelines that Aristotle laid out, and these are the guidelines that we still use today. I know you guys have heard these before, potentially in this class, so somebody tell me what is logos.
Appeal to logic.
Appeals to your logic, your reasoning, when you use facts and statistics and expert opinions, anytime you pull from the research, this is that logical appeal that you are using to persuade your audience. You as a speaker are collecting the evidence and presenting it to your audience. What is ethos?
Isn't it ethics?
Ethics is what people always say, and ethics is part of it. But in a public speaking situation, we tend to think of it more as the credibility of the speaker. So you as a speaker want to appear trustworthy, believable. You want your audience to know that you have their best interests at heart. You are trying to do something for their benefit. And when it comes to the credibility of the speaker, this always depends on the audience. The audience determines the credibility. But you as a speaker, you do your best to live up to that, to be trustworthy, to be credible, to be honest about your information, and to let your audience know how this will affect them. Somebody tell me what pathos is.
Emotions.
Emotions, exactly. Using emotions to persuade your audience. This includes pictures, stories, illustrations. Anytime you describe something in detail or evoke some sort of memory from your audience, you're using emotion or pathos. And a lot of people think that there's a fine line when you're using emotion to persuade. I agree that there is a line. But I also argue that emotions are necessary for us as human beings, as social creatures, to process all of the other information. We have to have some sort of context for that information. So if you as a speaker can create a connection with your audience and give them examples and tell them how it will affect them and their friends and their family members, that's using emotion to persuade your audience. We want to feel connected to the topic. We want to feel connected to what's going on in our lives. And that's what pathos is doing for us. You can use images that are dramatized or real life, just like we saw in the visual aid day, but all of that helps us to connect to the information and helps us to process it using our own experiences. Elaboration likelihood model is a little bit different than this in that it focuses on how, as an audience member or as a listener, as a receiver, you are processing this information. An elaboration likelihood model says there are two different routes to persuasion. You can either take the direct route. I'll also use the word central. They're synonymous. The direct or central route to persuasion. And this focuses mostly on the logic of the argument, on the logos. Not 100%, but mostly on that logic. Or you can choose to take the indirect or peripheral route. Again, those are synonymous. The indirect or peripheral route focuses on other cues such as the speaker's credibility and the emotion evoked from you as an audience member. Again, not 100% of the time, but the majority of the time focuses on those peripheral or indirect cues instead of the logic of the message. There are a couple of different things that play into whether as an audience member you choose to take the direct or the indirect route. Sometimes it's a conscious decision, sometimes it's not. And those cues are your willingness and ability to critically evaluate that message. So if you are willing to, if you are interested or highly involved in the topic, and you have the ability and the previous knowledge to critically evaluate the logic, then you will take that central route to persuasion, central or direct route to persuasion, because you can and you want to. However, that's not always the situation that you're in. So if you're in a situation where you don't care about the topic at all, or you don't know what's going on, then you might take that peripheral or indirect route to persuasion. Instead of being persuaded by the logic of the argument, you might be persuaded because you walk into a room where the person speaking is really gung-ho for their topic and they're using big words and they're dressed professionally. You think, that person looks like they know what they're talking about, so I'm going to believe them. Or you feel really emotionally connected to the topic at the time and they're evoking the right emotions from you that make you feel good. Then you might be persuaded through that peripheral route. Again, it completely depends on whether you want to and can critically evaluate that logic. And advertisements spend a lot of time and effort appealing to this peripheral route. They want their audience members to take that peripheral route to persuasion because there's not a lot of time for us to critically evaluate those 30-second or minute advertisements, whether you're on the internet or on the television. A lot of advertisements are coming towards you at once, and we mostly try to ignore them. So if they can persuade us by looking credible and evoking those emotions in us, making us feel really good about ourselves, and if they're pulling on our heartstrings, those are the type of things that people will buy, the different products and services that people will buy. Also, most of the time we don't have a lot of knowledge on every single item that's coming across to us in advertisements. So we don't have the ability to evaluate every little piece of information. So again, we mostly take that peripheral route when it comes to advertising. Hopefully if you're attending a lecture or watching any sort of political debate, you're planning on taking that central route and evaluating the other pieces of information. And I think I mentioned this just a minute ago, it can either be a conscious decision or an unconscious decision. If it's an advertisement, we just naturally go for that peripheral route. But if we're choosing to do something like buy a car, we generally go onto a lot and think about what's going to get us the gas mileage that we need, the cost that we have, how energy efficient is it in general, is it good for the environment if that's something that you care about. So sometimes you go in and you look at things like this. And if I look at that, is that the direct or indirect route to persuasion? It's the direct route. I'm looking at the facts. This isn't all the facts, but this is some of those facts that I can evaluate to see if they fit my needs and if it's a logical choice for me. But then people also buy cars for other reasons, and that is obviously a peripheral or indirect route to persuasion. If you see something you like because you think you're going to look cool in it, that's more of a peripheral route decision. Or if somebody you deem to be a credible person says you should buy this car. If my dad says you should buy Chevys because I really like driving them, that's a peripheral route thing. I might not be looking at all the facts, I just know that a person I deem to be credible has told me to buy it. So both of these different ways of looking at persuasion from the audience perspective and from the speaker perspective should affect the way that we persuade. We want to know if our audience is more likely to take that direct or indirect route to persuasion based on how much knowledge they have and how interested they are in the topic. But I also have to understand what I am doing as a speaker to portray myself as logical, credible, and using emotion in an effective way. Throughout speech 4 and 5, I should say throughout speech 4, we're focusing on attitudes, beliefs, and values. Speech 4 is just mental change or reinforcing our ideas, whereas speech number 4 will then move on to behaviors. Alright guys, speech number 5, we will then move on to behaviors. But for speech number 4, our focuses are on these attitudes, beliefs, and values. This is something that we briefly talked about at the beginning of the semester, but if you haven't written down these key words that I'm going to use, you definitely need to write down these key words. Starting with the attitudes, these are our likes and our dislikes. Those are the key words, our likes and our dislikes. I really like this dress that I'm wearing, but you could probably persuade me not to wear it anymore if you provided some evidence, some reasoning. And our attitudes are the easiest to change. So if you think of a dartboard, there's lots of area for our attitudes. It's easy to change, it's easy to hit those with your little dart of persuasion. Attitudes do tend to cluster. Attitudes, beliefs, and values all actually tend to cluster. But as attitudes change, they tend to change in groups as well. So I like to think of my husband as an example. In high school, he was a skater guy, so he wore band t-shirts basically every single day. He had really long hair, he wore skinny jeans, and he had either Vans or DCs, and he took his skateboard everywhere. Obviously, he doesn't do that anymore because he teaches English at a high school, and if he did that, it would not be good for him. So he still wears his band t-shirts, but his hair is cut shorter, he has more sensible shoes, he doesn't carry his skateboard everywhere he goes. Because those are things that he liked before, and those have changed. He's just evolved as a person. Good for me. Okay, so those attitudes tend to change just with our life. Our beliefs are more strongly held. They're a little bit harder to change, but they are changeable. These are things that we think are true and false. Those are the key words for beliefs. True and false. These are the things that we have to believe in order to keep us sane and motivated. So, of course, the sun will rise in the morning. It keeps us motivated to continue living our life and doing what we're doing. When I say something like, of course God exists, some people live on those beliefs. If I say, of course my college education is going to pay off, I have to believe that in order to be motivated to continue doing what I'm doing. But it also works the opposite way. So people who say, of course I don't need a college education to support my family. Obviously people succeed at that. And those people who do succeed at that have to continue to believe that in order to do what they are doing to support their families. Those are beliefs, true and false. And values are the most strongly held. They're the center, the bullseye of the dartboard. Values do not tend to change for individuals very often. These are things that we think are right and wrong, or good or bad. Those are those keywords. Right and wrong, good or bad. And these are often societally held. They do differ for individuals, but as a society, we have ideas of what we value, kind of like our ethics. What's right and wrong, what's good, what's bad. And sometimes people argue with me a little bit about where religion falls in beliefs and values, but it's both. If whatever facts about your religion or other things, true or false, existence, non-existence, but there are also a lot of values that come based on your religion or your community. Values, things that we think are right and wrong. So maybe adultery is wrong, but what the consequence is, you believe the consequence to be there or not, and that's a different aspect. Beliefs can change, and they do change. Values tend to be strongly held, ingrained in us, and it takes a lot more to change them. Values generally don't tend to change unless a vast majority of people around you express values of the opposite side. If a vast majority of people are changing their values, then individuals will start to reconsider those as well. That is why every moral or ethical question we've had in history has changed as a movement. Civil rights came as a movement. Gay marriage legalization came as a movement. It's not like Vermont legalized it 50 years ago and the rest of us are just getting it right now. These morals and values have changed with vast numbers of people to instigate this change. So when you guys are picking your speech for number 4, you can argue for any one of these levels. It's completely up to you. If you're arguing that something is right or wrong, you're very likely to have a split class. Some of the people are going to agree with you, some of the people are going to disagree with you on some issues, but you are welcome to persuade. When we get to social judgment theory later on, you just have to set a goal. I'll discuss social judgment theory, but it basically is setting a reasonable goal. How much do you expect to be able to change your audience? How much of your audience and how far do you expect them to be able to change? So if you're changing somebody's values, you don't have to get them to completely agree with you, but you can get them to consider your point of view, and that is still persuasion. You're still getting them to change the way that they think about something. So these attitudes, beliefs, and values are what we are focusing on for speech number 4 when we're trying to instigate that change. These are 4 different ways that we can get our audience to respond. 4 different strategies. Again, I'm going to talk about each one of these. But these are 4 strategies that I'll be looking for in your speeches. Things that I'll try to pick out if you're purposefully using one of these strategies. You don't have to use all 4. You might just use negative motivation or you might use it in conjunction with positive motivation. I guarantee all of you will be using these at least unconsciously, because these are things that we naturally do when we're trying to persuade our audience. It comes very natural to us, but since we're learning about persuasion, we now have to understand when we're using these and how we are using these. And not only that, but how other people are using these against us. So starting with cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort that you feel when new information conflicts with what you already believe in some way. If the information coming at you is different from what you already believe, it's uncomfortable. So the word cognitive means our thoughts or our mental processes, and the word dissonance means a lack of harmony or inconsistency. So it's an inconsistency in our thoughts. There are a couple of theories called selective processes. If we expose ourselves to information that is already consistent with what we believe, that's selective exposure. And selective retention means no matter what information is coming at us, we tend to remember the stuff that is consistent with what we already believe. You've probably felt cognitive dissonance if, let's say, you are hanging out with your friends and they're trying to convince you to do something that you don't think is right. You're feeling that cognitive dissonance. Or if you did do something with your friends that you thought was wrong, but you did it anyway, you probably felt that cognitive dissonance. And we want to reduce any cognitive dissonance we feel. So maybe you did that thing with your friends that you felt was wrong, and so you rationalize in your mind and say, nah, it wasn't that bad. Oh, nobody got hurt. That's one of the ways that we cope with cognitive dissonance. We change the way we think about it. Another way is to change the behavior that you're doing, or refocus on different parts of the message and just kind of ignore that cognitive dissonance. But what we want as a speaker is to get our audience to change and to convert to agree with us. There are actually 5 different strategies to coping with cognitive dissonance that you can use. But first, I'm going to give you guys a situation to think about these with. So my mom is basically a chain smoker. She's been a chain smoker my entire life. And when I was little, she used to always go outside and have a cigarette as I was getting ready for bed. And then she'd come in and tuck me in and try to give me a kiss. And I'd always be like, gross. But as a chain smoker, obviously her whole life she is hearing that kind of information. Like, stop smoking, it's going to kill you. Stop smoking, your breath is terrible. But she still smokes. So she's constantly feeling this cognitive dissonance of what people are saying to her is different than the behavior that she's actually doing. So there are 5 different ways that a person can cope with this kind of stuff. First of all, discredit the source of information. You're just a kid, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. And if the source is more credible, such as Mayo Clinic studies, it is more likely to be believed than if it's average Joe on the street, or just some other person that you don't care about telling you to stop smoking. You just say you don't know what you're talking about. The second way is to refocus on different parts of the message. So if it's an anti-tobacco ad, she says, well, I just smoke, I don't chew tobacco. Or I brush my teeth every day, I won't get mouth cancer. She doesn't have mouth cancer, by the way, but that's one of those signs that you constantly see. So she's refocusing on it. It doesn't apply to me for some reason. You can seek new information. Like I said with selective exposure, when we search for information, we tend to find the stuff that is consistent with our beliefs because we're looking for it. Either consciously or unconsciously, we're looking for information that is consistent with what we believe. And this is much more common in this age of technology that we have here, because you can just go on your phone and Google anything that somebody tells you and find the answer. So you try to seek out that information that will be consistent. You can just stop listening, just tune them out, ignore. So anytime you're driving down the road and you see those big black lung signs on the side of the road, the billboards, you just drive past it. Don't even listen to it. Don't even look at it. And then the last one, which is what we want to happen, is we're looking for that change in the speaker. So as somebody who is trying to persuade your audience, you are naturally going to be inducing this cognitive dissonance. If anybody disagrees with what you're saying, you have already induced at least a small level of cognitive dissonance because you're telling them something that's inconsistent with what they had already agreed with or already decided on. But you have to push that dissonance a little bit. Really focus on how your message is different and how they should change to be consistent with what your message. Push it and provide enough logical evidence and reasoning, emotional appeals, so that this seems like the best choice for them. To change those attitudes, beliefs, or values, or to change their behavior to be consistent with your speech. So this is the best example of what we just naturally do when persuading. Anytime information is inconsistent, you're using cognitive dissonance. The second way is appealing to your listeners' needs. But before I actually talk about appealing to your listeners' needs, I have a few questions for you guys. Some situations to posit for you. So if I say that over spring break, I went on a long car trip, how long do you picture?
30 hours.
30? That is quite long. Did anybody picture a different number?
I mean, anything over 6, I would say is a pretty long.
5 hours, over 6 hours,
Down
pretty
in
long.
Texas.
Down to Texas, a location, not just a number. If I say that I plucked a really long hair off of my husband's shoulder the other day, how long of a hair are you picturing? Like this long or like this long? What's a long hair to be a lone hair on a shoulder?
2 inches.
2 inches? That's pretty long hair. It was like 1.5 inches, but it's really weird and it's a long hair to me. Like, how did this hair get there without me noticing beforehand? But that's not the same that everybody pictures. We understand relatively what's a long hair to just be alone somewhere on a person's body. So that's easier to determine than a long car trip. We had anywhere from 30 hours to 5 hours for a long car trip. If I tell you that something is hot, like it's really hot outside in Wyoming right now, how hot does that mean?
Has to do a lot with location.
70? Depends. 75?
Because if you're in Texas and you say, oh, it's really hot in Minnesota, but like Texans are like, no it's not, 70's not hot at all.
Right.
But if we're in Minnesota, oh man, it's summertime. Like,
Exactly. I have to tell you guys what I'm talking about. Give me some more context cues. If I'm explaining to you guys the smartest student that I ever had, what are some characteristics that you think about?
GPA.
GPA. What else? What makes a smart person?
Organized.
Organized. I agree with that. That's definitely true. What if I say my cat's really smart?
Do a lot of tricks.
Crafty. Tricks. Open doors. My cat sort of
Sneaky.
plays fetch. Sneaky. Good cat will be sneaky. But I have to give you more than that. I have to tell you what my cat can do that makes it smart. I have to tell you why the smartest person I ever had was smart. I have to tell you whether I went on a 14-hour car trip back to my hometown or whether I drove to Texas. And I have to tell you that that hair is 1.5 inches long, and it was long, okay? All of these words are completely subjective based on the context that I have. If I just say that something is long, you have something different in your mind than the other people in the room. And the word need is also completely subjective. So when I say that you have to appeal to your audience's needs, that means different things to everybody. If I say you need to go buy this product, some of you think it might be this life and death decision, it might really change your life somehow, or some of you are like, nah, it might be kind of cool to have that thing. I have to tell you what that need is, because establishing that need and providing the opportunity to fulfill it leads to change. You don't have to write this equation down. It's never going to be on a test. We need to establish that need, and our speech is providing the opportunity to fulfill that need. That's what we want from our audience. And Maslow gives us this really cool pyramid called his hierarchy of needs that allows us to determine what our audience is needing at that moment. What Maslow says is that we have to fulfill each lower level of need before we can start to worry about the levels that are above it. So we first have to worry about our physiological need, like food and water. Then we have to worry about our safety needs, like clothing, shelter. Money is also a safety need. We want to feel secure. After we have those things, then we can start worrying about making friends and hanging out with our friends. After we have them, we can start worrying about our own self-esteem and feeling good about ourselves in a more strong way. And then the highest level is self-actualization, which is reaching your full potential, being the best that you can be, and having all the happiness in the world. What Maslow says is that nobody is ever continuously in this level of self-actualization. We are constantly striving to fulfill the level above us. And as college students, you're probably close to each other in what you need, but some of you maybe have really good scholarships, or your parents still pay for a lot of stuff, so you can focus on these higher levels, while some of you might not have any scholarships. You might be spending most of your time working, so you are just trying to stay above water and maybe hang out with your friends now and then. Your audience members are never going to be at the exact same spot, so you as a speaker have to tell them what they need and how much they need it. If I want you guys to be self-actualized and be the best person that you can be, maybe I'm trying to persuade you to donate blood and help others and be a good person. Some of you might just be worrying about getting by, so this self-actualization isn't at the top of your list. I have to tell you how important that is so that I can get you to change for something that's way up here, that's a little bit out of reach at the time. If I'm trying to get you to buy something expensive or based on status, maybe a really cool watch, or you need the new technology that's coming out, or you need a really cool car, but you, again, are down here just trying to pay for your college, it's going to take a lot more persuasion. I have to tell you why that is so important. I have to give you the context and the magnitude of that. But you can do that. Obviously, people who don't have money buy big cars, not big cars, but nice cars all the time. People who don't have a lot of money and don't have a lot of shelter, they still try to be the best person that they can be, because that's something that we're always striving for. We always want to go higher on the scale. And if you're working 40 hours a week and going to school full time, we still find time to hang out with our friends, because we want to strive for those higher levels. But whatever you are arguing in your speech, it might not be a concern at that moment for your audience members, and you have to make it a concern. Tell us why we should change. What are we needing right now that that change will fulfill? If it's a moral question, you might be appealing to this self-actualization. So if I'm giving a speech on plastic surgery, which one of these audience would be most likely to be persuaded by it? It's not a trick question, they're easy choices. Number 2. Absolutely, number 2. But of course, lots of women with low self-esteem still get plastic surgery all the time, even if they don't have the money to do it. So I can persuade any one of these audiences, but number 2 is going to be the easiest to persuade. I'm not going to have to establish that need so strongly in them.
How would you persuade the homeless?
You know, I would have to do some research and get back to you. Maybe if they look better, then they'll be able to get a job. If you get your lips all plumped up and a breast enhancement, you could probably get a job somewhere. Those are the first 2 ways to motivate our audience to respond, and we appeal to people's needs all the time. You're hungry, right? You should go get wings with me. It's appealing to the needs, okay? Positive motivation is the 3rd way. Something else that happens naturally. You go with me, and it's going to have good consequences to it. You're going to benefit some way. Follow my advice, and you'll get everything you ever wanted. Yes?
For number 2, what was like the needs?
Yeah, appealing to needs, and you have to specifically tell your audience what it is that they need that will be fulfilled by your persuasive speech. So with positive motivation, the focus here is on what they will get out of it that is positive, obviously. That was kind of needless to say. Emphasize those positive things, but not just emphasize the features that are good, you have to emphasize how it will benefit them as people. So when you do go to a car lot, a salesman doesn't just say, well, it's got AC, tires, seat warmers, video. They don't just list it all out for you. They say, you want these seat warmers so that when your family gets in the car in the winter, you can be comfortable on the way to school. Or when you go on a trip to visit your faraway family, the DVD player will help keep your kids content and you can have a happy trip with your family. You have to emphasize how it's going to benefit people. And not just how it benefits individual, but how it benefits our loved ones, our friends, and our family. So this leads straight into that last piece, that when you're using positive motivation, it does have that strong focus on emotion. We have that emotional connection to the topic so that the logic has context, so that the logic makes more sense to us because we know how it will affect us and our friends and our family. You have to use that emotion if you're using positive motivation. What are all the wonderful benefits we have? And this is in juxtaposition to the last one, which is negative motivation. Bad things will happen if you don't follow my advice. If you continue to ignore me, bad things will happen. So that anti-smoking campaign, if you continue to smoke, if you don't follow my advice and quit, you're gonna get lung cancer, or mouth cancer, or emphysema, or you're gonna die. And these are fear appeals. Not all negative emotion has to be fearful thing. If you don't put down that ice cream cone, you're gonna have a tummy ache. That's still negative motivation, but it's not scary. Fear appeals are very common. If you have something that has dire consequences, negative motivation, it will be the most common way that people do this. And so with fear appeals and negative motivation in general, but specifically with fear appeals, there are a lot of guidelines that go along with it. And just like with positive motivation, threats to loved ones work better. I'm not saying that you should threaten people's loved ones. That would not be an ethical speech. But if you're saying there are consequences, don't just tell them there are consequences to you as individuals, but how will this affect the people that you care about, the people that you love? If any of you have younger siblings or children, somebody starts talking smack on your little kid or your younger sister, you're like, it's not gonna happen, I'm gonna beat you down. But if people talk a bunch of smack on you, you can just ignore that easily. We want to protect the people that we love, so we don't want the negative consequences to affect them. Fear appeals also work better when speaker credibility is high. So if you think that person knows what they're talking about, you're more likely to believe those consequences are real. Again, studies from the Mayo Clinic or the American Heart Association are more believable than if you just see it come across Facebook from any old friend that you had 10 years ago. It only works if the threat is perceived to be real, so we have to be honest about what could happen. And this also depends on people's experiences. So if you know somebody who has died of lung cancer because they smoked their whole life, you're more likely to see that as a real possibility. If you don't know anybody who's ever died from lung cancer or a specific smoking-related illness, then you might not believe it's as real of a possibility. You have to believe it's real. Fear appeals are more effective the more serious the consequences are. So if it's an intense thing, then a fear appeal might be effective. If you say, brush with Colgate or you might get a cavity eventually, it's not going to be very intense. You shouldn't try to scare your audience in that way. It is a potential consequence, but it gets more effective as it intensifies. And you have to be, like I said this already, honest about what's happening. If you lie, you're not only reducing your credibility as a speaker, but you're losing all the people who might have changed their opinion. So I have a really good example of how negative motivation is used. Have you guys ever heard of the Meth Project, the Wyoming Meth Project? Have you ever heard the slogan, not even once? Meth, not even once. That started with the Wyoming Meth Project and Wyoming and Montana. And I have examples here for you to see the Wyoming Meth Project. This is purely based around that negative motivation and fear appeals. So the Wyoming Meth Project puts out all these advertisements on television, radio, and online that talk about what are the potential consequences. And there's a variety of these, from like sex crimes to hurting your family members to stealing money to just dying yourself. Yes?
I just saw today on the computer that there's like a string of meth that's going around and it's laced with Ebola.
So nobody do meth. You might get Ebola.
Ebola.
I think that's a pretty good fear appeal. Don't do meth or you might get Ebola. But anyway, a lot of these don't just focus on the individual themselves. So these are good examples of how they use the fear appeal in relation to our family members. Specifically, one of them has this person who got their little sister into meth. One of them has friends. The one I'm going to have you guys listen to is about family also. I'm just going to play one that you can listen to, not one that we can watch because they're pretty graphic. You guys probably saw a lot of these about 6 years ago. If you watched YouTube videos, these are what played before a lot of videos.
If I had asked, will I lose control on meth? Can meth really make you violent? Or if I had asked, will meth make me steal from my own family? I wouldn't be asking my brother.
Where's your money? Where is it? Give it to me! Give it!
That's the part where they say ones. So these commercials, like I said, they're very, very graphic if you actually watch them. But this is the example I always think of when I'm talking about a negative motivation, because the fear appeal is very, very strong here. It's never just like, don't do meth or your skin might get messed up. It's don't do meth because you can hurt the people that you love. And all these really, really negative things can come out of it. So that's an example of fear appeal. One thing about a fear appeal that I would say is you have to provide that opportunity for change here as well. If you say all these bad things could potentially happen and you don't provide some opportunity for us to avoid those bad things, it's not going to be effective. You're not actually persuading us to change in any way. You're just scaring your audience. I had one student who tried to give a persuasive speech. Not really sure what the proposition was, but all she talked about was in the next 80 years, so probably in our lifetime, Yellowstone is going to explode and we're all going to die. And that was just it. We were all like, so what can we do about it? There wasn't anything for us to do. So it is a fear appeal, but it's not motivating us to change in any way. It's just scaring your audience. Okay, so each of these 4 different ways, cognitive dissonance, appealing to needs, positive and negative motivation, are things that I will be picking out. If you're trying to persuade us that there are certain benefits to something happening, you're naturally going to be using positive motivation. Some topics you naturally use negative motivation. For instance, like pro-choice or pro-life, often negative and positive motivation play huge roles in that. But you have to know that you are putting these pieces of information into your speech since it's part of the grade. I'll be looking for these pieces. Okay. That's persuasion. Now I want you guys, if you don't have notes out already, it looks like you do, we're going to start talking about these different pieces of our speech that we're changing, how we're going to be able to alter them and how to choose our topics. So to start off with, considering our audience is always that first step and the most important step in the speech process. So, is your audience one who will enjoy listening to emotional appeals or not? Would a fear appeal be effective or not? So you might have to ask your audience what friends and family members they have that could be affected by your topic so that you can appeal to that. If it's something that doesn't affect us as individuals, how will you give that speech instead? As college students, we assume that our audience isn't going to reject logic. We assume that our audience is going to critically evaluate our speeches. But when you're giving anything persuasive in the future, you have to consider, is this person purely running on emotion right now? Or are they able to evaluate my message? Does this person have the previous knowledge to evaluate my message? And how is your audience different from you? You want to give a message that will resonate with your audience members. If you remember that survey assignment I talked about last time a little bit, speech 4 or 5 are potential options for that survey assignment. You can ask things like how they currently stand on the topic, their attitudes, beliefs, their values, how much they know, and how much background you're going to have to give in your speech. Ask them if they do have family members in the age range or whatever group that your speech might be affecting. And all surveys will be completely anonymous, so you don't have to worry about asking something that could be personal. You can pull statistics out of that as opposed to using individual answers. And of course, you guys have the option to answer the questions or not. When you're selecting and narrowing your topic, I do encourage you to talk about something controversial. It doesn't have to be completely controversial, but is there going to be anyone in your audience who disagrees with you? Because if 100% of your audience already agrees with you, it's not a very challenging topic. So I guess challenging is a better word. I'd like you to choose something challenging. If you guys want to look after class, I do have a list of topics from previous semesters. This is a complete list, but these are some topics that I've given in the past, both challenging and not challenging topics, to give you some ideas if you haven't chosen one already. But something that you're passionate about. And I also mentioned this before, but if you want to see your first activity in this class where you answered the question of what you're interested in, you can look at that. The third step to the speech-making process, of course, is determining our purposes. So we're changing that general purpose from to inform to persuade. Don't let this be a point that you lose just because you forgot to change it on your template. Make sure you change it from to inform to persuade. But we're also going to be changing our specific purpose. And if you remember from before, our specific purpose had any measurable verb that was list, describe, define, explain, and some of those are more challenging than others. If you want your audience to list something, that's very easy. If you want them to describe or explain, that's a little bit more difficult. You may not have been using those verbs in that way, but that's the general idea. If you want your audience to know more about the topic, then you might ask them to explain. And the same is true when we're writing a specific purpose for our persuaded audience. We want our audience to agree with this statement that we're persuading, but that's not always going to be the easiest of goals. So I've got a little handout for you guys. You might want to keep this. This is on social judgment theory, but it's completely up to you if you want to keep it or not. You can always get it back to me at the end of the period if you are just going to throw it away. So social judgment theory says that all of our attitudes, beliefs, and values fall along a continuum. We don't just believe one thing or another. We have different ideas about the severity of each of our decisions. So with social judgment theory, there we go. Our attitudes on this continuum are varied. Not everybody falls in the exact same spot, but the place that we fall individually is called our anchor. Our anchor is our belief. Our latitude of acceptance are the range of beliefs that we agree with. Our latitude of non-committal are the range of beliefs that we haven't really thought too much about. We kind of are on the fence. We could go one way or the other. And then our latitude of rejection are all the opinions, the attitudes, beliefs, and values that are so far away from what we believe that we're just not going to be convinced at this time. So if we're talking about what to do with murderers, I have my latitude of acceptance, my latitude up here, my latitude in general. Okay, so of all of these different things that you could potentially do with a murderer once they're convicted, I've decided that my anchor is right here. I think all murderers should be in prison, life without parole. I'll accept it if we put them to death. I'll accept life in prison. Those are the opinions that I accept when it comes to what we should do with murderers. You could probably convince me that death by torture is acceptable. You could probably convince me that 20 years is acceptable. I'm on the fence about those. I'm not really sure what to think about them. But never will I agree with the fact that we should go any less than 20 years. Anything less than 20 years, I completely reject. So if somebody's trying to give me a speech, let's say Jack T. Ripper is this person who's trying to give a speech in my class saying that if somebody gets caught murdering other people, then they should probably do 5 years in prison. And if they're not rehabilitated after that, then it's just not worth it. It's not worth our time and our money to keep them in the prison system. So after 5 years, if a murderer is not rehabilitated, then we should let them go. And that is their speech. So that is where Jack's anchor lies. Obviously, that's in my latitude of rejection. I'm not going to completely agree with him at the end of that speech. But he might convince me to lessen the severity of my option. So instead of asking me to completely agree with his opinion, he might just get me to consider it and think that maybe life without parole is a little bit too severe. He can get my anchor to move into this latitude of non-committal as opposed to where it is right now. Maybe now I think that 20 years in prison is enough. After that, it's not worth our time and our money. Then my latitude of non-committal might shift a little bit as well. My latitude of rejection on this side might get a little bit smaller, and perhaps I will completely reject death by torture after that. So when you're asking your audience to agree with something, it doesn't have to be complete and total agreement. That's why if you're trying to persuade your audience to agree with your attitudes, beliefs, and values, it doesn't have to be 100% agreement by the end of your speech from your audience. But have they started to consider? Did you provide enough logic and evidence, use some of that emotional appeal to help them process it so that they think you have made some good points? Maybe their ideas aren't 100% solid and completely right like they thought they were before. So when we're considering this with our specific purpose, we're changing our measurable verb. We're trying to posit something for our audience to agree with. So at the end of my speech, my audience will agree with something. And that's what we want to use. But if you know that your audience is completely on the other side of the spectrum, like here, if you know that, then you can ask your audience to consider. But those are the only two words I want to see. Either at the end of my speech, my audience will agree, or at the end of my speech, my audience will consider. And then you put your topic in after that. So as an example, at the end of my speech, my audience will agree that Dell computers are better than Apple computers. I know that most of you have Apple computers, so I can still give this speech knowing that most of you probably disagree with the statement. If 100% of my audience has an Apple computer, I would probably change it to, at the end of my speech, my audience will consider that Dell computers have benefit over Apple computers. It completely depends on my goal as a speaker and how far my audience is away from me. And that is the idea of social judgment theory, which will definitely be a question on the exam, social judgment theory. For speech number 5, we'll be changing it again, so I'm just showing you this to give you an idea of how it will change. Our specific purpose for speech number 5 will change to, at the end of my speech, my audience will do something. They're going to be making some sort of change. What action should be taking place? So that's how speech 5 will differ from speech number 4. Speech 4 is just focusing on whether we agree or disagree with what you're arguing. Something right, wrong, good, bad, true, false. Something is or is not happening. But we're asking for agreement or consideration. Our central idea is also going to change. If you guys need me to show you this slide again later, I can. But our central idea is no longer called a central idea. Instead, we're writing a proposition. And the proposition is that statement we want our audience to agree with. So if I said, Dell computers are better than Apple computers, that is my proposition. And instead of writing central idea, I would write proposition of value. Dell computers are better than Apple computers. We no longer need a blueprint. You don't have to give me the reasons for that in the proposition. Just give me the statement you want your audience to agree with. So for this reason, your specific purpose and your proposition should say the exact same thing. If I say at the end of my speech, I want my audience to agree that Dell computers are better than Apple computers, then my proposition should say exactly that. Dell computers are better than Apple computers. That is the sentence that you are arguing. And for speech number 4, we have the option of doing a proposition of fact or a proposition of value. Propositions of policy are for speech number 5, although I will be telling you what they are today. But we can choose between fact or value for speech number 4. A proposition of fact are those things that are true or false, did or did not happen. These focus on our beliefs. Yes or no to that. Those of you who did read the speech number 4 assignments, you've seen some more examples of this. But one example I have, is that when women joined the military, the quality of the military improved. That is a statement I want you to agree with at the end of my speech. Proposition of fact, when women joined the military, the quality of the military improved. Whether or not you as audience members agree with this statement at the beginning of my speech, I want you to agree with it by the end of my speech. That's my goal. That's my proposition. A proposition of value is different from a proposition of fact because it focuses on value judgment. You can generally see if it's a proposition of value because it has keywords like better than or worse than. Anytime you're comparing two things in your proposition, it's going to be value. anytime something is good or bad, right, wrong, ethical, unethical, those value judgment words, those lead to a proposition of value. So when I said Dell computers are better than Apple computers, that's a value because I'm saying something is better than something else. I'm comparing the worth of the two items. You can still answer yes or no, like are Dell computers better than Apple computers, yes or no, but it has that value judgment word, which is why it's a proposition of value as opposed to a proposition of fact. Any synonyms like greatest or worst also fall under here. So an example, it's wrong to turn away immigrants who want to come to the United States. I'm saying it's wrong. That's my value judgment word. If it doesn't have any of these key words in it, if it doesn't have a value judgment word, then it might be more of a proposition of fact. There is a line between these two, fact and value. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish. So if you have any trouble with your proposition, the thing that you want to argue, let me know so that we can put it on one side or the other as opposed to straddling that line. And then those are for speech number 4. Speech number 5 is this proposition of policy that says something should happen or needs to change or must change. So if you see the word should or need to or have to or must, those are all things that are advocating for a behavior or a change in policy, and those are policy speeches. So as an example, each student at this school should receive a new personal computer. You guys already have that. I guarantee that speech was heard a lot of times. Okay, so that's fact, value, and policy. Does that make sense? Good. Okay, so for an example, a high-protein diet is a more effective strategy in weight loss than a low-carb diet. Is this fact, value, or policy?
Value.
Value, yes, why?
More effective.
Yeah, more effective than. I'm comparing two things. How might I change this into a proposition of fact? Christy, sorry.
So a high protein diet is an effective weight loss diet.
A high-protein diet is an effective strategy to lose weight. A high-protein diet will help you lose weight. I'm saying this will happen. This is something that is true, it will happen. Or I could say a low-carb diet will help you lose weight. Instead of comparing it to the other one, I'm just focusing on one and what it will do. How can I change this to a proposition of policy? Yes?
You should have a high protein diet.
Exactly. You should have a high-protein diet. People should eat less carbs. Both of those are policy because I'm asking for a behavior from my audience. Again, I can just choose whichever one of these I want to. Maybe you should say, or maybe you can say that having both, as an audience member, your diet should consist of both high protein and low carb in order to lose weight. That's still policy as well. So I have an example for you guys. Oh, I've actually got 2 worksheets for you guys. This first one is just determining fact, value, policy. After we take this, I'll give you the answers, but keep this then as a frame of reference for the future. So take probably 1 minute, maybe 2 to answer these questions. What's your first instinct? And then we'll go through them. This part might be a little bit weird, but those of you watching from home, this will be found under your assignments module. You'll find the key and the worksheet. So the first one, government is withholding information on UFOs. Is that fact, value, or policy? Fact. I'm saying that is something that is happening. The Vietnam War was immoral. Value because of what word?
Immoral.
WSU should provide more free parking spaces. Why? Should. It's wrong to avoid jury duty. Value because of the word wrong. Harrison Ford is the greatest actor ever. Value. Because great is just a more extreme word for good. If you're saying something is great, you're saying that it's good except for really good. Death is inevitable. Fact. Neil Armstrong was the first man to step foot on the moon. Fact. The city of Laramie should adopt a recycling program. Policy. Republicans are awful people. Value. Yeah. Obesity causes health problems. Fact. I'm saying that it is or is not happening. Good. Hold on to that. How many of you guys got 100%? Yes. That's awesome. Okay, now I have another worksheet for you guys. This one will be due at the end of the period, so you've got 10 minutes to fill this out, and when you're done, you are free to go. Those of you at home, this will also be found under activities, and it's due next class period. What this worksheet is asking you to do is to take your proposition that they give you and determine whether it's fact, value, or policy, and then rewrite it as another option. So if it's a proposition of policy, you can choose to rewrite it as fact or value, but pick one of those and label which one you're trying to write. So if you choose to write a value, write value. This shouldn't take too long. If you guys have any questions, just let me know, and you're welcome to work with the people around you. This is going to help you out because I know people struggle to turn their policy speech into fact or value. A lot of people want to give that proposition of policy speech now. And almost any topic can be given as fact, value, or policy, just depending on the information and the way that you phrase it. Yes?
So can we add words?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can add words. You can alter the topic a little bit if you want to.